welcome to Risk Roundup. While the advances in science and technology has given us information, communication, and digitization technologies, along with powerful search engines, social networks, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality, drones, autonomous cars, 3D printing, quantum computing, and so much more that transforms not only cyberspace but also geospace and space. It has also brought us a whole new world where the most successful criminals are those that can hide behind the anonymity that the cyberspace offers, and individuals and entities across nations, its governments, industries, organizations, and academia are far more likely to be victimized in cyberspace than in geospace. Now, since each of these existing and emerging technology has a different set of qualities than the connected computers and internet, individually and collectively, they raise complex and diverse legal and policy issues. So how can nations keep up? How can nations individually and collectively respond to the complex legal challenges of cybercrimes, cyber technologies, and cyberspace? To discuss complex legal and policy challenges of cyberspace and cybercrimes and cyber technologies further, I am delighted to welcome Professor Pauline C. Reich to Risk Roundup. Professor Reich is the founder of Asia Pacific Cyber Law, Cybercrime, and Internet Security Risk Research Institute based in Tokyo. She is also the general editor of Cybercrime and Security, published by Thomson Reuters. Welcome, Professor Reich. We are on Risk Roundup.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So let's begin the discussion by transformative technology and its impact on current laws. Cyberspace is growing at an enormous pace and is becoming the new preferred ecosystem for the digital inhabitation of individuals and entities across nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia. Understandably, it is creating complex legal and policy challenges that has far-reaching consequences. What complex challenges do you see emerging because of cyberspace?
Well, I think that one primary problem is definitions. And I published a book in 2012 with Dr. Eduardo Gelbstein, who was one of the information security leaders in the United Nations. I had met him through the World Summit for the Internet Society. And one chapter that I wrote for our book, Law, Policy, and Technology, was entitled To Define or Not to Define. The issue of definition is very important in law. So a judge will look to the law and say, well, this is not in the definition under our law, and we have no law to apply, or this is defined as so-and-so. So the problem with the word cybersecurity is in a number of years before I wrote that book chapter, the Russians and the Americans sat down and they tried to look for common definitions and vocabulary. They were brought together by a group, an organization called the East-West Institute. And they couldn't even agree on the word cyber because they didn't have it in their vocabulary. And cyberspace, huh? So, when somebody says cybersecurity to me, my antenna go up and I say, well, are you talking to me about the tech aspect, or does it encompass cybercrime, which I do work with? But now there's also cybersecurity law and cybersecurity policy. And it's such a poorly defined, these are poorly defined terms. So we need to have an agreed upon lexicon or glossary to work from, and there isn't one. So yes. This is where we are. So if you say cybersecurity and I say cybersecurity, since my fields are law and policy to do with internet and technology, I may mean something entirely different, and then we have to spend a half an hour defining. Now, I did this when I worked on a book with two Japanese judges, and we had to define terms in English and see if the Japanese definition was similar. So lawyers and judges and people in legal and policy areas really need the definitions and need clarity. So that's a big problem.
Yes, it
And
is
those
a problem, and you are absolutely right about it. Because if you talk about, if you ask a lot of people in tech, you tell them cybersecurity, they would think it's information security. A lot of them
exactly.
think that cybersecurity is information security, but it is not. You and I both know that it's a very broad term, and it encompasses so many things. It is network, it includes network security, information security, data security, as well as all these emerging technologies that are coming from cyberspace, how those technologies are impacting the current models, the current systems, the current business model, governance models, and management models, how it changes the way we do things. All this is a part of cybersecurity,
But
and that,
we have to be on the same page, so to speak.
yes,
So if you're talking in the context of one area and I'm talking in the context of another area, we're not on the same page. And when this comes to national security types of cybersecurity and two nations talking to each other, it's very, very difficult.
yes, very.
There's also
So,
there's
how would you
an
let me interfere
yeah.
here? How do you define cybersecurity?
I refuse to.
Yes, okay.
No, I become very specific, and within the broad area of cybersecurity, as you said, there's information security, and I would say cybercrime is subsumed in the broader area.
Yes.
So it depends on what field you're coming from. Now, what concerns me is the need for interdisciplinary dialogues among law, policy, and technology communities. So the 2012 book had that definition. And we had divided the book. The first part was people who were computer science people, and they were led by Ed Gelbstein, who was a PhD in computer science. The second part was law and policy people, and I led that team. So we didn't exactly collaborate, but we harmonized. The trend I've been seeing recently, I've seen a couple of trends. One is in academe, they're in silos. So the tech people don't meet with the law people and don't integrate the law and policy into the tech field. Now, there's someone in New Zealand who is a computer science PhD who is heading a graduate program in cybersecurity, and they have a master's thesis requirement in which the student must write a thesis on a cybercrime topic. So that's a very good example of an interdisciplinary dialogue between law and tech, led by a tech person, but inclusive of law people. And I think it's an excellent model. Now, in the United States, we also have interdisciplinary models, but then we may have models that are solely tech, and they are called cybersecurity, and they're taught by computer scientists or tech people, and they don't necessarily treat the legal issues that later wind up in court when police investigations are challenged by the privacy community.
Yes.
So we need to dialogue, and I'm very concerned about the lack of collaboration among the disciplines. Another trend is smart cities,
Yes.
and we don't know if people will have privacy if the tech people are talking in isolation to other tech people and the law is not integrated. So these are some of the issues of collaboration that I think are really important.
You're absolutely right, because the silo problem is not just for the cybersecurity industry. It is for each and every industry, or each and every critical security risk that we are seeing across nation. They all emerge from the fact that everything is being done in silo, and people are focusing only on their independent risks that are impacting them, and the interconnectedness and interdependencies that are a part of so many critical risks that are emerging and coming our way, that is not addressed. So it is a big problem, and cybersecurity is, like you said, there is a need for collaboration, cooperation, and that is one of the reasons why we launch Risk Roundup, so we can invite decision makers from across NGIA, from across disciplines, across sectors, and we have that collective dialogue, and we create that collective intelligence so that we can address the complex challenges that are coming our way, just like we are doing now. So having said that, when it comes to technology transformation in geospace, while contracts and transactions and the records in many ways are defining legal structures and systems, cyberspace is also evolving so much faster than the law's ability to handle the transformative changes brought on by the technology and its associated security challenges. So in your perspective, what does the introduction of any new transformative technology in cyberspace mean for cybersecurity, cyber law, and policy?
Well, let me back up a little bit. One of the problems that I also see is that people who write legislation may not be that knowledgeable of the tech area. And the majority of people aren't. People in some countries don't have any training, and they're expected to draft law. Judges may not have training. In my area of law, judges may not have training. And I'm concerned about, who do we trust if we are non-techies and we're barraged with a lot of commercial hype? So we get solicitations from companies that say, we can handle all of your cybersecurity problems for your corporation or your organization. And the non-tech world doesn't know who to trust. And many of the commercial companies are promoting for financial gain, but they may not be the best product. So one thing I'd love to see is something like a Consumer Reports for cybersecurity to guide the non-tech people to set up a kind of checklist. For example, when you go to buy a new car, you might go to Consumer Reports and compare different models. I'd love to see an objective standard of some kind that would enable the non-techies of the world to evaluate, either for their corporation or their university or their government, or for individuals to evaluate the products that are being hyped. And I'm saying hyped because there's so much hype, and we really need an objective standard or some outside body that can help us.
Yes, absolutely. I hear your concern and point, and I think you are right about it, that there is a need for that kind of standards and that kind of education and awareness model that would help the majority of the population across nations, because the computer literacy, cyber literacy, cybersecurity literacy is not common, and not everyone has a technological depth or understanding of how to evaluate a lot of things, and how to handle a lot of things, how to operate computers, and especially this is a big concern because of the cryptocurrencies that are emerging, and all the wallets. It looks like that where we are going is that if the cryptocurrencies are accepted, as people are hoping that it will be, then each individual will become its own bank. And if everyone is their own bank, and if they don't have the basic understanding of computer security or cyber security or network security, then it's going to be bringing, many complex challenges our way, and people will be losing all of their life savings, because the thieves would have, very easy time, to get all the, money from people's wallets, because the security aspects and understanding and awareness is just not there. So what you are suggesting is absolutely timely, and I hope that not only the computer makers, but the application makers, and everyone who is a part of this computer ecosystem, that they all get together, collaborate, and come up with the standards to help the common man across nations. Now there is a growing debate about the
Yes.
nature. There is a
I
growing.
was I was going to jump in and say
Please.
consumer protection is another area that lawyers get involved in. And the Federal Trade Commission in the United States was fortunate to have some very good tech people working there. Well, one is now back at Carnegie Mellon, but we need to protect consumers who do get cheated. Now, as far as cryptocurrencies, I I've reviewed what countries around Asia were doing about legalization of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. I did the review last summer, and some countries have prohibited cryptocurrencies because their citizens aren't that aware of what they're getting into. Now, I hear people here in Tokyo, Japan has jumped onto the cryptocurrency bandwagon and said it's legal, but I see them pulling back a bit now. There have probably been people who've lost their shirts because they didn't know what they were getting into. Young people might say, hey, this is cool. Let me invest money. I'm going to be a billionaire. I won't have to work. And then they lose money. I've heard them come to press conferences about something that happened here with one of the Bitcoin exchanges a couple of years ago, where someone went to jail, it was hacked, etc. So I think there's still room for debate. I don't think cryptocurrencies are that safe, and governments in some cases have the central bank running its own cryptocurrency. I believe China is doing that, rather than exposing people to unregulated, speculative kinds of deals. But I still hear people telling me, I've made a lot of money through Bitcoin, and we don't need that kind of regulation, and blockchain is very good. Now, blockchain is coming over to the cybersecurity area, blockchain alone without the currency aspect. But blockchain is now being considered a good measure for security. So we can maybe be more cautious. I think we should be more cautious in consumer protection of people who don't know what they're doing, and we may need to have more, not education, but maybe more regulation. Another area where people think technology is cool, but don't know what they're doing, is use of Wi-Fi. And people will go out to a public place and think they're secure because they don't know the security aspects of Wi-Fi. They use their mobile phones everywhere, and they don't realize you're using your credit card via Wi-Fi. Well, you could get hacked.
Yes.
So we need more public awareness in general, and then we need to have deeper training for the cybersecurity people who work in our countries. But there aren't enough. There's a shortage worldwide of trained cybersecurity experts. No country has enough people. So we need to have some basic skills. And we need to be aware that it's cool, it's efficient, but you need to know what we call the dark side.
Yes, very true. No, that we do need very structured training programs for not only the kids in elementary school, but also the senior citizens. I mean,
Yes.
each and every uh, generation needs this kind of training, because this digitalization and digital global age is here to stay. And without having that understanding, education, and awareness about the security aspect, a common man will lose so much more, and that is a big concern. Now, as we just talked about the cryptocurrency, and we talked about the blockchain, but there is also this growing debate about the nature of the influence of information communication, and so many other technologies like artificial intelligence, or quantum computing, or virtual reality, or CRISPR technology, that when we evaluate these, how do you see these emerging technologies shaping the legal and policy framework in not only United States, but also Japan, where you stay, and across every other nation?
Yes. Well, technology is changing constantly. Today's internet may be totally different within 5 years from now, due to something like quantum computing, for example. Change is so constant. Indian IT people, because I go to India quite a bit too, Indian IT people whom I interviewed in September 2017 told me that their jobs are changing and disappearing, and they may not know the next round of technology. And these are young people with young families, and they're worried about what's happening next. Developed or more developed countries are in different stages too. We can't compare the United States and Israel with Cambodia and Laos, for example. Yes, I'm based in Japan, therefore I look at Japan, but the countries around this region are in very different stages of adoption of legislation to protect people using the technologies. The Philippines is one country that's been pretty good about adopting law, and they have a sophisticated public. So when they adopted a cybercrime law a few years ago, there was a constitutional challenge, and it held up the adoption of the law for several years because people felt there was a violation of the Constitution. Now, you may not have a well-developed constitutional um, uh, um, background in some countries. I've been with Laos at the Council of Europe cybercrime meeting in Strasbourg, and they're new to this. I've been with Myanmar, been with Cambodia, and and Vietnam. Some countries are whizzing along. Thailand certainly has adopted a lot of technology and business, but they need to adopt more law too. And that law may be very different from the law in other countries, in democracies around this region and worldwide.
Yes,
Uh,
very.
yeah, huge amounts of investment are needed to create new kinds of cybersecurity software, and we must engage in constant research. And the question is, who's going to fund it? Governments may not be willing to fund it, and yet there may be companies that are very making a lot of money that could be providing research funding and are not.
Yes, I mean,
So,
that is a very fair point that you made, and that is a cause of concern, that without proper and effective funding, how will nations protect its citizen effectively, because we see that these issues involving intellectual property rights and privacy and cyber victimization or fraud and deception, it's not like it's happening only once, every other year. It's happening almost every day. So
Constant.
that is a big concern, that how to protect citizens. So how do we protect citizens? How should nations protect citizens?
Well, on May 20th this year, there was an article in my hometown paper, the New York Times, entitled Banks Adopt Military Style Tactics to Fight Cybercrime,
Yes.
because the loss to financial institutions and economies is huge, and it's projected to be even greater. So I brought along some statistics today that I thought would support what you just said. The February 2018 Accenture and Ponemon Institute report, The Cost of Cybercrime Study, indicates that cyber attacks cost financial services firms more to address than any other industry, and the rate of breaches has tripled over the past 5 years. The costliest types of attacks for banks and insurers are denial of services, phishing, social engineering, and malicious insiders. That is, people working within your organization who may commit cyber crimes. And we've seen quite a bit of that. The same report indicated that the average cost of cybercrime for financial services companies globally has increased by over 40% over the past 3 years, from $12.07 million per firm in 2014 to $18.28 million in 2017, significantly higher than any cost for other types of cybercrime. I'm sorry, than other costs. I'm going to have to say that again. Sorry. The same report indicated that the average cost of cybercrime for financial services companies globally has increased by over 40% over the past 3 years, from $12.07 million per firm in 2014 to $18.28 million in 2017. That's significantly higher than the average cost of $11.7 million per firm across all industries that they studied. So
Yes.
financial institutions, we know, have always been affected very much by cybercrime. And
True, but see, the financial institutions have a lot of funding, a lot of resources to, divert towards security. But what about other industries? What about small businesses? What about individuals? That's where we have a big challenge.
Exactly. I think the sector of small and mid-sized businesses really needs help because they can't afford to have the in-house staff or to hire the big consulting firms, and they're vulnerable. Law firms could also be in the same situation. If they're not the major law firms, they may not have the in-house staff. They may not be able to pay for the consulting firms. And as for individuals, again, people have come to me and said, my students have asked me at the beginning of my cybercrime and cybersecurity classes, they've said, Sensei, what kind of security software should I have on my computer, my home computer, or the device that I'm using? And that's the first question. And again, we need this consumer reports maybe for each country because there's different software available. There are different companies that market their software in the different countries around the world.
Very true, very true. And then another big issue that needs to be addressed is how effective are these, softwares to provide security. That is also a big, concern that do they do what they communicate to the consumers that they are doing, like providing security, like all these antivirus softwares, how much security does it provide? So that
Well,
that is also a
no,
big challenge.
nobody is 100% perfect. Why? The bad people have lots of money. It's a big industry because they make an awful lot of money from cybercrime. One statistic, I believe it was from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, uh, February 2018 report, I think it was February, said that cybercrime amounted to $600 billion last year. And in other years, they've said that cybercrime produces more income than drug trafficking worldwide.
Yes, that
It's more serious. So the bad guys have, and I don't know how many women are in the field, but I don't know anyone who's doing this. But the bad guys have lots of money, and the good guys, and I'm on the good guys side. When I look at the police, I did training for the Interpol cybercrime division in Singapore in September, and the police from developing countries in ASEAN came to the program and said, we need new technology, we need training, and the governments cannot or won't pay for their training. I was in India about 5 or 6 years ago, visited a number of police stations in Goa. Why? I was hacked. And I met with the police detective and the superintendent of police in Goa. And that was really interesting. They barely had a computer in the police station. Now, the Indians are complaining to me that the police have training available and don't want to go. And my answer is, well, if you create an elite group within the police, within a country, and you pay them well and honor them in some way, make them an elite group, they may be more motivated to acquire the latest knowledge and training.
Yes, very true. That is necessary across nations, not just in
Yes,
India, but in each and every country. This is
yes,
required because without that digital expertise or security expertise, there are no crimes that could be probably solved in the coming years. Not only today, but also in the coming tomorrow. People will, these detectives or policies, they won't be able to solve much of the crimes without having that expertise. So that is very necessary. Now, let's talk about robotics because it's shaping to be the next transformative technology of our time, and is going to blur the line between the man and machine, and is already has started raising very complex challenges for law and policy. Do you think that courts are capable today to manage the complex challenges the robotics is bringing to law?
well, there are pros and cons. Just like there are pros and cons to cryptocurrency, there are pros and cons to what robots can do for human beings. When I looked at the courts, and I was asked to look at robots in terms of robot judges and robot juries recently. And I think that the robotics could be very, very helpful where there are huge caseloads and very routine kinds of cases. I was thinking traffic violations could possibly be dealt with because they're pretty routine. But then again, when you get to some precedent-setting case in the United States, which you might, I don't know that the robot can be programmed enough to evaluate a more complex case, whether it's parking violations, or I was thinking of immigration, because historically immigration law has been something that a paralegal could do because it's pretty routine. But today's immigration case may be much more complex, requiring a lot of human testimony. And then there are ethics issues, and I don't think a robot can be programmed to do the ethical evaluation that a human judge is called upon to do. And so you might be able to use the robotic judge for very routine kinds of things. I'm thinking of small claims cases where it's handled in a 1-hour session usually by a human being, so it's not awfully complex. There are patterns to small claims cases, I think. But then again, the human being has to be involved, has to program the robot, and also I think has to keep some involvement in the quality control, let's say, or the looking at the ethics issues.
Yes. Yes.
As far as the robot jury, again, when it comes to human decision making compared to robotic decision making, I don't know. I haven't seen any prototypes yet, and there are some who propose the robot juries. I do think that the robots can do repetitive research if they're programmed. I think that they could go to a database for me. If I say, robot, I have a case that involves, let's see, I'm trying to think of something involving cybercrime. Recent, no, too complicated. Somebody hacked a bank account, and the amount hacked was $500. It was in the state of Georgia. Is there a law about hacking a bank account online in the state of Georgia? Do they have law? That's something I could entrust to a robot, perhaps, if the robot can go into a database for me.
Yes, I mean, these are going to be not big complex things that the robots will start addressing immediately. So it's going to be step-by-step approach. So first, in the beginning, it will take, smaller, role and smaller task like you just talked about. And then, as it learns more, because it's just like teaching kids, we are trying to teach machines how to do certain things. So it's going to take time before it's able to do all the complex tasks that humans are thinking that they can do. But to be able to do that, to be able to have robots and artificial intelligence do all those complex tasks that we are hoping that they would do someday or one day, what new institutions do you see that would be necessary to deal with the issues this kind of robotics and artificial intelligence will raise?
Well, I see another challenge. What's the role of the human being? Mm-hmm. And especially in developing countries where people are just getting an opportunity to be middle class. Again, I'm back to India, but we have a huge middle class in India, the size of the whole US population. And what happens when the robots are brought in to replace them? Where do they go? So the economic benefits versus the labor issues, the replacement of the human being. What's the future of the human being? And when do we bring in the ethics people to tell us what is the impact of this automation?
Yes, that is a topic of discussion for a whole risk roundup. that
Right.
what is going to be the role of humans, and where will humans fit in, and what would happen when this machine workforce battle starts taking away job of human workforce. There are a lot of complex challenges and issues that will emerge, but let's stick to the legal and policy issues here, because
Okay.
that will take up a whole hour of discussion, and
Absolutely.
it's such a
Absolutely.
it's such an important topic that we want to
Sure.
address it. I have already addressed this on another risk roundup with a Singularity University, and we have talked about all these issues that you just raised. So
Good.
there is a lot that needs to be thought about. We cannot rush into creating this machine workforce without understanding the impact it would have on the human workforce. So that those questions will need to be addressed very, very seriously by
And it, yeah, and
all.
it will have to be decided country by country in terms of the country's stage of development.
Yes, very
And so each country will have its own policy on how we're going to use the robots.
true. That is very true. Each country will have to decide how they want to use artificial intelligence, how they want to use machine intelligence, and how much they want to implement for their industries and for their work processes, and how they would manage the jobs that are lost, and how they would help the uh, human workforce and retrain them. So there are a lot of things that needs to be evaluated. But let's talk about the drones now. What kind of legal
Sure.
questions you see drones presenting?
Well, we're seeing them already. Countries are debating when it's legal to use a drone. And I've seen cases in the US, Australia, UK about drones and when they can be used and where they can be used and what kind of law can be applied. Should it be local law? Should it be federal law, etc.? So this is evolving. Again, we don't see consensus in many of these evolving technology issues, but some countries are adopting law because people may say, well, there's a privacy aspect here. And so the local government may say, you can't fly a drone within X feet of somebody's house, or you can't use a drone for whatever. So we are seeing legislation being adopted, not consistent, not even within one country is it consistent.
I see. I see. No, that is where the complex challenges are. That each and every country is addressing all these emerging technology and its impact on law and policy in a silo manner, like you just said in the beginning. So that is a concern, and we will have to collaborate, cooperate, and come up with a unified, legal and law and legal aspects of all these emerging technologies, and come up with global policies. So let's hope that the nations go there. But do you see these existing and emerging technology, irrespective from whichever technology we are talking about in cyberspace, geospace, and space, do you see that it will trigger the breakdown in the rule of law in the coming years?
Not at all. I think that we are seeing adoption of new laws as we meet the challenges. And what we saw recently was there was a case that was in the U.S. Supreme Court, and there was a lot of legal concern from Europe. It was the Microsoft Ireland case, in which data from Microsoft was being held in the cloud in Ireland. Ireland is a very strong privacy jurisdiction, and the US wanted to gain access to the data. And we had so many briefs from so many governments in Europe and elsewhere, and organizations and corporations, and it went on and on and on and on. Finally, the US Supreme Court got to back away from it because the US adopted new legislation. And new legislation was a way to get out of the deadlock because both sides had compelling arguments. And I've seen those compelling arguments when I presented the training at the Interpol Cybercrime Unit in September in Singapore. I presented the pros and cons of something else, which is when law enforcement is investigating murders and very compelling issues, or there's terrorism, and they need to violate privacy in order to investigate. So that's one compelling argument. On the other hand, the average person, like me, may be photographed in a crowd and without my knowledge or with my knowledge. Law enforcement doesn't have a search warrant and just does the photography. And it's a very mixed kind of, it's got its pros and cons. And there's no right answer to this. I think that it depends on the situation, the facts of the situation, and we have to weigh and balance. But I'm talking about American law. I'm talking about American expectations of privacy. There are not the same expectations in other countries.
Yes.
And I think they may be using this kind of technology in China without any restraint. It's fine to do in China.
Yes.
I saw it in smart cities projects in some places where everyone who lived in a government-owned apartment building was photographed, and that was okay under that country's law. So again, it's going to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Yes, yes, very true. It is country by country, and each nation's government and decision makers, they are doing things where they feel comfortable, and they want to control their population. They want to control the information flow, and a lot of security issues that emerge. So they're creating their own policies. So let's talk a little more about the communication and legal challenges, because the free flow of information on internet enables very new forms of collaborations and governance. And it also introduces the threats to intellectual property and privacy, and that is one of the reasons why China is very guarded on how the information flows from their country. Now, while the internet brings communities together, it also creates conflicts, as we see time and time again. So what legal challenges do you see emerging as the computer code and connected computers and internet invokes a distinct sense of place with new possibilities and new norms? But it also introduces these methods of exquisite control by organized private and state interests, like we see in China, how they have come up with that facial recognition and technology, and they're using it on their citizens, and how they have come up with that social credits system in China, that if you behave good, well, then you get extra points, and you are able to have access to certain privileges that not everyone would have. So these are very complex challenges emerging.
Well, again, it's country by country.
Yes.
And that's why we haven't been able to achieve consensus in the Council of Europe Cybercrime Convention. Russia and China have not joined and have not signed, and Russia has constantly objected, saying that it would lose its sovereignty if it allowed police from other countries to enter its jurisdiction. It also complains that it wasn't part of the original drafting of the convention. So when I've attended the Council of Europe cybercrime meetings in Strasbourg at the European Parliament, Russia will attend. There'll be an interpreter from Russian to English, and they will object every time, but they do attend.
Yes.
So the UN has tried to get consensus, and even within the UN, I've heard two different divisions that are totally independent of each other. And one is the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, sorry. And I would say that India, again, trying to be a third world country, a non-aligned country, whatever it says these days, but India and Russia and China have tried to work with the ITU. But another component of the UN is the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And they operate completely separately. I was invited to a conference in Vienna a few months ago as an observer based on my research institute activity. And when I tried to talk to them about any evolution within the UN of any consensus or they've been attempting to have a global treaty. And they said, well, ITU is a separate unit of the United Nations. And so the Office on Drugs and Crime is solely looking at cybercrime. And that's one component of the big picture. But there's no harmonization between offices, units within the United Nations. Things are so polarized from office to office, depending on what their mission is.
Yes.
So it's very hard to get anywhere with this. The only convention, the only global convention we have is the Convention on Cybercrime, which many countries use as a model, but have not adopted. Because to ratify and join, your law has to look like what the Council of Europe legislation and resulting policy indicates. And some countries have ratified with exceptions and said, no, we don't agree with these components, but we're going to ratify. Other countries have not, and they keep struggling with how can they adopt domestic law that's within their notion of what should be.
Yes, very true, very true. And now we also see that this free speech to fake profiles in cyberspace, they create very complex challenges. So how do you see courts handling these complex issues emerging because of these cyber crimes and that we see because of the free speech and the fake profiles?
Well, I'm not going to talk about fake news, but I will talk about another emerging area that's very interesting, and I'm watching it evolve. And that is cyberstalking. And there's a new area of cyberstalking, and I'm seeing an activist group of lawyers in the United States talking about, how can I express it? How can I explain it? Strangers will post false information about a victim. For example, what I've just seen recently, it's coming, I think, from New York, but it may be coming from other states where there's state lawsuits, where somebody posts online that a man is having an affair or he's homosexual, but he's married. And Playboy just had an article that was a link to the activist website that I've been seeing. But the question that sometimes arises is, when do you have freedom of speech? When are you committing defamation or harassment. So sometimes there could be a fine line between a disgruntled former date. I think I saw a case where somebody had gone out on a date and the other person didn't want to date them again, and all of a sudden something was posted, I don't know if it was on Facebook or where, saying this woman is looking for sexual contact, and the same was done to a homosexual, and he was a married man who was a homosexual, and people were being told that he was homosexual, told that he was looking for activity, and it ruined his life. So when is it freedom of speech? And it's a fine line, and I'm a little concerned about the First Amendment issues that may arise. I haven't seen the defenses. I haven't seen the cases yet. I haven't had the time, but I think this is a fine line problem that we may see.
Yes, it is. So, how do you think we should regulate these kind of digital information exchanges?
Well, in looking at the evolution of the Cybercrime Convention, what I saw in some European countries was that they took existing law and they said it could be applied online. So if I don't have the right to defame another person in a newspaper, I shouldn't be able to do that illegal act online.
Very true. So, do you see these regulations of digital interactions and connectivity keeping up? Because right now it's open land for everyone. Anybody can put anything on internet without having to worry about consequences. There is
Well, I don't know about that. I'm also interested in seeing the evolution of something Facebook was doing, because they were hiring people to look at the communications on Facebook and maybe to take down. Now, I saw something on LinkedIn recently. There's a person that I know who is definitely not telling the truth, someone I know. And LinkedIn apparently took it down, and I was very glad. I don't know how they determine who is legitimate and who is not. And I have seen hacks of LinkedIn over the years, and I have seen people that I suspect may be hackers who are not legitimate. I've seen the same things on Facebook where I'm sent somebody's information, and I immediately, my radar go up and I say, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. And what we've seen, actually, what's been identified is that people are using other people's photos and fake biographies to make contact with others. So I'm pretty cautious about who gets into my network. And I have my criteria, and I won't even allow my own cousin to be in my LinkedIn network because he's a real estate broker, and that's not my field. So I don't know how people make their own decisions, but I also say, wait a minute, is this someone I know personally, or have I met this person in a professional setting? And how many of the people that I know are in this person's network? But I've seen people who just do not exercise caution, and I've told people LinkedIn is not the same as Facebook.
yes.
Secondly, I've said Facebook is a place that's read by other people. It's not just your private circle. So we've seen instances in which lawyers in insurance cases have gotten evidence against a plaintiff In other words, somebody says, I was injured at work. I'm disabled and I'm suing the employer. And then they post to Facebook, I went skiing last week and had a great time, but meanwhile they're going to the insurance company's office on crutches with fake medical documentation.
Yes.
So lawyers can use what you post on Facebook, even though Facebook is for social purposes and LinkedIn is for professional purposes. Again, the law can step in.
Yes. Yes, very true. Now, let's talk about the cyberspace regulations. It seems like there's a growing number of people who feel whether cyberspace should be regulated at all. Do you see that law is no longer the most appropriate mode of digital regulation? And do you think that we should rely instead on blockchain based agreements and smart contracts to protect individuals and entities' rights online? Because there's a very intense debate going on between this technology people that let's just self-regulate internet, let's not have governments interfere with the regulation. What do you think we should be doing?
I think there's a place for the technology and for the law and regulation. Why? The challenges are evolving, and no technology is 100% safe. And I think it still falls to the courts to get involved when there's, for example, a data breach. Huge companies have all kinds of software in place. They're not negligent. And yet somebody comes along who invents a better mousetrap. And that's happening because, as I said, the criminals have lots of money. And of course, the private sector software companies have huge amounts of money. And yet the criminals are looking for ways to get in there. So I think there has to be a collaboration. And what concerns me is we're all on the good side, supposedly.
Yes, very true.
But I've heard and read comments, keep the law people out. Or the law people say, keep the tech people out. We don't know what they're saying. We don't understand. Keep them out. No, the law people, I don't know if they say that so often. But we need to be collaborators and to work on these problems together. Look at the GDPR, for example, the new European legislation and regulations. And they have a fallback about companies or covered institutions that don't take the proper measures, and they can be fined.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm sorry to say, we need sometimes to use punishment when entities are lax, don't take it seriously. And this is going to be a new bunch of regulation in addition to the cybercrime legislation and the other kinds of legislation that we mentioned. This is going to have an effect on how we use the internet or whatever the next kind of quantum computing or whatever the next technologies are.
Very true. I mean, so you think that new laws, the legislators, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them to create new laws and to new regulations. Do you think that new laws should be the last resort, and that we should not be creating with each and every new emerging technology? We should not be just bombarding the innovators and the consumers and everyone with new laws, every single day. What do you think, that should we be very conservative in creating new laws, or we should be very liberal in creating new laws?
Well, let me tell you what I know about how they created the Council of Europe Cybercrime Convention. It took years, And I think there were 19 drafts altogether.
Mm.
And they kept meeting and trying to hammer it out. So it takes a kind of evolution. But what they did was they never defined cybercrime in the convention.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
they talked about areas in which there could be criminal acts. So they couldn't do it. They had to make it broad enough so that the individual country could look at what its situation was. I was reviewing some reports recently, and for example, ransomware was a problem in some countries, but not all countries last year. It was a big theme in some places, and in other places, they didn't have that experience.
Yes.
And again, I'm not saying that any country is free from child pornography or trafficking online, but the problems are different in different places.
Yes, they are. They are very true. So, what are the emerging trends of cybercrime law that you are witnessing?
Trends of law.
Cybercrime law, yes, cyber law.
Yeah. Well, I looked at U.S. Department of Justice's IC3 program for 2017. They produce an internet crime report each year, and they were talking about trends last year as business email compromise. I'll explain that in a minute because it was brought to me. Ransomware, technical support fraud, which I'll explain in a minute, and an elder justice initiative,
Mm.
and extortion. Okay, so let me explain what they are. Those were trends last year. Now, this year's trends may be different. They may be the same, they may be different. The trends that I saw 10 years ago were different from the trends I see now. So each year we kind of have a theme. Okay, business email compromise. Company gets a contact by email or phone. Wire transfer money from your corporate account to this bank. Okay, so someone came to me. It's someone from the jewelry industry in New York, and someone had called his office. Fortunately, he's a very how can I say it nicely? He's very tight-fisted and doesn't let his staff touch any money. So his staff person called him and said, I got a call from this person who spoke to you. Should I transfer? I forget how much money it was. And being as tight-fisted as he is, he said, of course not. And plus the fact it was a fraud. And this was a pattern that I was seeing and reading about last year. Ransomware, I think people are pretty familiar with it. Technical support fraud. I have a friend who is an elderly person who's bedridden, living at home with a caregiver. And she was contacted by people, and she was suspicious. And this was going back a few years. And she said, should I give them access to my computer? Should I pay that? And I said, well, I don't know if this is a legitimate person or not, because the criminals were getting into it where you would give them your credit card information to check your computer security. And just yesterday, I was in touch with Norton, and they don't have technical people in Japan. I got a call that said, no caller ID. And I had to disclose information. I was very uncomfortable about it. But again, we're back to who do you trust? But the technical support fraud was they were calling people and saying, well, let me into your computer and I will do work for you remotely. And just like if someone calls your house and says, I'm selling the New York Times, whatever, you want to know if they're legitimate or not. The Elder Justice Initiative is great because seniors are vulnerable. And there are some projects working with the seniors. But I've seen elderly lawyers. I know someone, a brilliant man, who teaches at 2 law schools in the Washington, D.C. area, who didn't know how to check his own email. And I introduced him to YouTube a couple of years ago, and he was so thrilled to be able to watch C-SPAN. He didn't know that he could watch it online, or he could see press conferences, and he was so thrilled. So the older cohort of people in most countries doesn't know how to use the technology to its fullest, but also doesn't know how to be safe. And that was a trend that the elderly were vulnerable. AARP was working with it. And there's a wonderful project in Brooklyn, New York called OATS, O-A-T-S, and they've received foundation grants for their work in digital literacy for the elderly. And they're doing a great job of enabling people to know how to stay safe and also how to stay connected to society. Extortion. We had the Ashley Madison case, and that was an adultery website. And there was extortion about not disclosing who was on the site. So these are some examples of the kinds of things that the Department of Justice is dealing with. But most recently, the election fraud situation.
Very
And
true.
they've indicted people, people in Russia, from Russia.
Yes.
There's been a group indicted recently.
Yes. Yes.
So there's a lot. Now, I got some statistics from IC3, and from 2013 to 2017, 1,420,555 total complaints were filed with them, representing $5.52 billion in total losses. So that's monetary loss.
Yeah.
And then CCIPS, the Computer Crime and Intellectual Property part of U.S. Department of Justice, handles intellectual property issues too, such as theft of trade secrets.
Yes.
And cybercrime cases.
Yes.
And what I've seen this year, I've seen more adult cyberstalking, and I've seen actually former police who've been arrested and indicted for cyberstalking. So it's the use and abuse
Yes.
of the technology is being picked up by U.S. Department of Justice.
Yes. Yes.
But states are also involved. States,
yes.
Local police, there's an awful lot going on.
Yes, very true. And when the people in power, abuse their power and they do the cyber stalking, then it's a cause of great concern, because then who to turn to for protection? So now this is such a broad topic, and there are so many different variables and aspects of cybercrime and cyber policy and cyber law that needs to be addressed. But we are way past 1 hour, and
I'm sorry.
no, there is this topic is so interesting, and there's so much to talk about. So I think this is the last question.
Sure.
We will address the rest of the points in the coming episodes. But what would you like to tell our global viewers and listeners as to the your initiatives, your books, and the projects that you're working on?
Okay. Well, I'm continuing as general editor of the 3-volume, 3,000-page law treatise, Cybercrime and Security. And there's just so much going on. There's so much policy and legislation. There are so many cases to follow. in countries all over the world. I'm currently editing the update of the China chapter. We're also trying to produce, and I hope we will, trying to produce work on cybersecurity insurance. This is an evolving field in not all countries, but some countries. So we're working on that, and there are contributing authors who are lawyers and sometimes judges and professors from all over. So it's very exciting. It's continuing. And I'm also I'm working on other projects, consulting with. I've been asked by lawyers to help them with better digital literacy. So I'm working on something to help them. For example, what do you do with digital evidence when it's allowed in a jurisdiction? So how does the average bright lawyer deal with submitting digital evidence to a judge?
Yes. Very true. Wonderful. No, these are good initiatives. So thank you so much, Professor Reich, for participating in this roundup today. We appreciate your thoughtful insight on complex legal challenges of cybercrimes, and our global viewers and listeners will benefit tremendously from the information you shared today. And we thank you for helping Risk Group raise awareness of this critical topic.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. So there is a need for stringent laws that can provide unbreakable security to nations' information in cyberspace, geospace, and space. Risk Group Cybersecurity, Geosecurity, and Space Security Risk Research Centers are created to identify, evaluate, and manage the risk facing NGIOA and CGS, that means nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia in cyberspace, geospace, and space. We at Risk Group believe that risk management, security, and peace walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to management of threats and peace to the management of conflict, risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict. And it is not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts feed into each other. We believe that the security we build for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security, so if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security, and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the risk roundups, to watch the risk roundup videos, or hear the risk roundup podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayashree, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.